The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith, Chapter 5. The morning of his sailing, the morning he had looked forward to with such buoyant excitement, got off to a hideous start. Tom followed the steward to his cabin, congratulating himself that his firmness with Bob about not wanting to be seen off had taken effect, and had just entered the room when a blood-curdling whoop went up. "Where's all the champagne, Tom? We're waiting." "Boy, is this a stinking room. Why don't you ask them for something decent?" "Tommy, take me," from Ed Martin's girlfriend, who Tom couldn't bear to look at. There they all were, mostly Bob's lousy friends, sprawled in his bed, on the floor, everywhere. Bob had found out he was sailing, but Tom had never thought he would do a thing like this. It took self-control for Tom not to say in an icy voice, "There isn't any champagne." He tried to greet them all, tried to smile, though he could have burst into tears like a child. He gave Bob a long, withering look, but Bob was already high on something. There were very few things that got under his skin, Tom thought self-justifyingly, but this was one of them. Noisy surprises like this, the riffraff, the vulgarians, the slobs he had thought he had left behind when he crossed the gangplank, littering the very stateroom where he was to spend the next 5 days. Tom went over to Paul Hubbard, the only respectable person in the room, and sat down beside him on the short built-in sofa. "Hello, Paul," he said quietly. "I'm sorry about all this." "Oh," Paul scoffed. "How long have you been gone? What's the matter, Tom? Are you sick?" It was awful. It went on, the noise and the laughter and the girls feeling the bed and looking in the john. Thank God the Greenleafs hadn't come to see him off. Mr. Greenleaf had had to go to New Orleans on business, and Mrs. Greenleaf, when Tom had called this morning to say goodbye, had said that she didn't feel quite up to coming down to the boat. Finally, Bob or somebody produced a bottle of whiskey, and they all began to drink out of the 2 glasses from the bathroom. And then a steward came in with a tray of glasses. Tom refused to have a drink. He was sweating so heavily he took off his jacket so as not to soil it. Bob came over and rammed a glass in his hand, and Bob was not exactly joking, Tom saw, and he knew why. Because he had accepted Bob's hospitality for a month, and he might at least put on a pleasant face. But Tom could not put on a pleasant face any more than if his face had been made of granite. So what if they all hated him after this, he thought? What had he lost? "I can fit in here, Tommy," said the girl, who was determined to fit in somewhere and go with him. She had wedged herself sideways into a narrow closet about the size of a broom closet. "I'd like to see Tom caught with a girl in his room," Ed Martin said, laughing. Tom glared at him. "Let's get out of here and get some air," he murmured to Paul. The others were making so much noise nobody noticed their leaving. They stood at the rail near the stern. It was a sunless day, and the city on their right was already like some gray distant land that he might be looking at from mid-ocean, except for those bastards inside his stateroom. "Where have you been keeping yourself?" Paul asked. "Ed called up to tell me you were leaving. I haven't seen you in weeks." Paul was one of the people who thought he worked for the Associated Press. Tom made up a fine story about an assignment he had been sent on. Possibly the Middle East, Tom said. He made it sound rather secret. "I've been doing quite a lot of night work lately, too," Tom said, "which is why I haven't been around much. It's awfully nice of you to come down and see me off." "I hadn't any classes this morning." Paul took the pipe out of his mouth and smiled. "Not that I wouldn't have come anyway, probably. Any old excuse." Tom smiled. Paul taught music at a girls' school in New York to earn his living, but he preferred to compose music on his own time. Tom could not remember how he had met Paul, but he remembered going to his Riverside Drive apartment for Sunday brunch once with some other people, and Paul had played some of his own compositions on the piano, and Tom had enjoyed it immensely. "Can't I offer you a drink? Let's see if we can find the bar," Tom said. But just then a steward came out, hitting a gong and shouting, "Visitors ashore, please, all visitors ashore." "That's me," Paul said. They shook hands, patted shoulders, promised to write postcards to each other. Then Paul was gone. Bob's gang would stay till the last minute, he thought. Probably have to be blasted out. Tom turned suddenly and ran up a narrow ladder-like flight of steps. At the top of it, he was confronted by a cabin class only sign hanging from a chain, but he threw a leg over the chain and stepped onto the deck. They surely wouldn't object to a first-class passenger going into second class, he thought. He couldn't bear to look at Bob's gang again. He had paid Bob half a month's rent and given him a goodbye present of a good shirt and tie. What more did Bob want? The ship was moving before Tom dared to go down to his room again. He went into the room cautiously. Empty. The neat blue bed cover was smooth again. The ashtrays were clean. There was no sign they had ever been here. Tom relaxed and smiled. This was service. The fine old tradition of the Cunard Line, British seamanship and all that. He saw a big basket of fruit on the floor by his bed. He seized the little white envelope eagerly. The card inside said, "Bon voyage and bless you, Tom. All our good wishes go with you. Emily and Herbert Greenleaf." The basket had a tall handle, and it was entirely under yellow cellophane. Apples and pears and grapes and a couple of candy bars and several little bottles of liquors. Tom had never received a Bon Voyage basket. To him, they had always been something you saw in florist windows for fantastic prices and laughed at. Now he found himself with tears in his eyes, and he put his face down in his hands suddenly and began to sob.